Fantastic. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. This is Doug Brunke in the back, following up in the back. I have to stand back here for perspective, so it's in there a little bit on the tall side. So we are here in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I'm with William Harding, and so he'll be our second speaker today. But we're really pleased and honored to have 5 amazing speakers today talking about IoT, Internet of Things. This is a technology that's happening. It's amazing in a lot of different areas, and we're going to be talking about at least 2 market segments in a little bit more detail. It's a lot to cover in 30 minutes. 5 speakers, about 6 minutes each. I would recommend that all the speakers be thinking about that you're talking to a president of a company that may or may not be in the industry, and they're just trying to learn what kind of opportunities are there in here, and then set up the stage for a potential follow-up conversation. That's really all we're trying to do today. So it'll be probably too technical today for some of you, and maybe not technical enough for some others, but our goal today is really to talk about what's happening and what are some of the opportunities. Our first speaker is Christian Oviedo. He's, I understand he's in Argentina, and I didn't quite catch where exactly you are, Christian, so maybe you could tell us that. You're going to be talking about the Internet of Things developments, including big data. So thank you for kicking us off today.
Okay, thank you. Okay, well, thanks everyone. Well, my name is Christian Oviedo. I'm a software engineer and manager at Vates. Vates is a software development company here at Argentina. Our headquarters are in Cordoba. We have also development centers in Buenos Aires, Santiago, Chile, and we have commercial office in Buenos Aires, in Cordoba, in Chile, and the States. We have been working with technologies related to Internet of Things, big data, machine learning, and cloud computing for almost 7 or 8 years. During this period of time, well, we have to face several challenges. I want to talk about this challenge that we have to face. For example, we have to deal with a lot of sensors for different vendors. These sensors, the issues that they have is that they manage different protocols. We have to deal with Z-Wave, with Bluetooth, with Wi-Fi. So this is one big concern when you want to start an IoT project. So if you are trying to start an IoT project, you have to take into account that, the type of protocol that you are using too. Other challenge that we faced was the data, yes? When you start deploying IoT solutions, you start recollecting a lot of data. So you can't use for this type of situations traditional tools like, for example, a database. In that case, you have to recur or to use platforms for big data, for machine learning. And well, we have to, because of that, we have to start working with big data and technologies in the cloud. The next slide, please. Well, first of all, I didn't talk to you about what we consider IoT, but you will find a lot of definition of our IoT. For us, IoT is when you connect your physical world to the digital world through internet. You use some sensors and you send this data to the cloud, and you process the data in the cloud, and with this data you take some action. For example, you can switch off or on a switch, you can turn on off a light, you can lock and locks, yes? This is what you generally do with this type of things. Next slide, please. Well, in terms of trends, what we are using now is this type of architecture. You will find that in IoT there are a lot of type of architecture. The more simple architecture is when you use Wi-Fi sensors and connect these sensors to the cloud. But for some time of use cases, you need more advanced architectures. Nowadays, we're using the architecture that you see now. This is 7-layer architecture. In the bottom layer, you can find the sensors. These sensors manage different type of protocols, and these sensors can do almost everything. You can, for example, take the temperature, the humidity, the electricity consumption. After that, you have to send this data to some place, yes? The first place that you send the data is the gateway, that is in the third layer. And to connect to the gateway, you have to use a protocol, a wireless protocol. In general terms, the protocols that you use are Z-Wave, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Zigbee, maybe, yes? Once the data is in the gateway, you decide whether to do. If you can process the data in the gateway, or you can send the data to the cloud. Depending on the amount of data that you have there and the type of use case that you have, you can send the data to the cloud or resolve the problem in the gateway itself. Once you put the data in the cloud, you have several tools, like for example, tools for data mining, tools for applying machine learning, like for example, TensorFlow. And with this tool, you can discover new patterns. You can, for example, improve your business because the IoT solution starts to generate a lot of data. And after that, you send information to the end user, yes? And next slide. Here you can see what we implemented here in our solution. In the left side, you can see the implementation of the architecture. I won't try to talk about the whole solution. For example, point 1, 2, and 3, that are the level number, the layer that is in the edge, the layer that is about connectivity and physical devices. This we use Z-Wave sensors, we use a gateway for CyberTime, for example, and we use protocols like Z-Wave and Wi-Fi. Next slide, please. So what we see about the future and what are the trends? Well, we think that with narrowband IoT, it would be change the game. The connectivity cost will go down substantially, so it will be you will see an explosion of solutions regarding, for example, a smart meter, electricity meter, smart water meter, smart gas meter, people tracking, asset tracking. So you will see a lot of this type of solutions. The IoT will have a great impact on the economy because you move from your physical world to the digital business. And this point has to do also with the third point, that is increasing the demand for data scientists. Once you move your business to the physical, to the digital world, you can start using tools like machine learning, deep learning, to discover new insights and to discover new opportunities to improve your business. It's common to discover that when you find a new pattern, for example, in the data, you change your business model. And in the next slide, yes, next slide, please. Okay, now next slide. Well, what I want to talk is about remote, okay, here we go. Remote monitoring and predictive maintenance is also a trending topic nowadays. For example, we have a lot of experience working with industries, and nowadays they are implementing what is called Industry 4.0. For example, car manufacturing are using a lot of IoT here in Argentina, in Chile, also in Mexico, and the States, of course. Yes. Well, that was my presentation. So if you have any doubt, please let me know.
From Argentina into the U.S. and Scottsdale, Arizona, and William C.B. Harding is a distinguished tech fellow at Medtronic. He's going to be talking about the application of IoT in healthcare, and that's where he's mainly focused. William, thank you.
Perfect. Thanks, Doug. So building on what Christian said, and Christian did a great job of setting the foundation. And for those people who aren't familiar with the company I work for, Medtronic, we mostly focus on neuro, cardiac, spinal, and diabetes. And so our approach to IoT, and what we characterize also as BIoT or biological IoT, is what is the need? What is the gap that we're trying to address? And so we can come up with all these solutions and technology capabilities, and any one of us in this meeting can say, okay, I can build this and put it into place. But what have we done in our assessment of the technology against the needs of our customers? And so in the case with Medtronic, we have implanted devices, we have neuro devices, we have monitoring devices. But how do I turn that into something that addresses the patient's need of restoring quality of care, helping the healthcare provider, helping the payer, helping the caregiver? And so we had to take a step back. It was a bit humbling to say, yeah, we can interconnect systems. And I'll give an example. In my own home and environment, as far as experimental lab, I have 9 routers, 5 hubs, 5 voice recognition systems, 95 sensors, everything from motion, vibration. My dogs are part of the experiment. So I've got RFID transceivers within the in the areas to monitor what they're doing and their activities. And so when you look at all these type of scenarios, you say, well, what does that mean to me? My car is part of it. My sheets are part of it for activity, respiratory, and temperature changing. The premise around that, what is the need, is I have a colleague in India. I have a colleague in Argentina. My parent is there. I need to monitor their health. I need to figure, I want to know that they're healthy, that they're being cared for. Did they get out of bed? So when we look at those needs, we say, okay, that's in health, patient management and monitoring, that makes sense. But what about the patient who wants to be at home to recover, relative to a surgery or age, or even versus a hospice type environment? What do we do about those type of scenarios? And so what Medtronic has been focusing on is not just single point needs or use cases, but how do we create that interconnectivity? So it brings us back and it says, what do we really know about beyond the technology, but the human part of us? And so when we started looking at our solutions for IoT, and as a little bit of a backstory or not too much of a digression, is we're actually leading an IEEE team on clinical IoT utilizing blockchain. So we started working also on the data protection plans, as far as data schemas of what we actually characterize as metadata encapsulated token authentication, but not to get into the technical terms. But what do we know around the patient's needs? And so when we looked at this, we realized we know how to assess technology from, let's put it in. But do we know how to do it? This is a good tie into what Christian said. Do we know how to interface it? Do we know how to make it work with existing systems? Do we know how to transform the data between systems? What's the causal relationship? And that's where we're really finding the gap is. We all go to consumer electronic shows and we see all the neat protocols. But when I look at examples of experiments, some of my technology doesn't talk wireless. Some of it's infrared. Some of it's inductive coupling. How am I going to bridge those gaps with existing systems in a model of thinking sustainability, ongoing, end of life? And so often we look at solutions from a Six Sigma, DFSS, or DMAIC type premise of saying, we just need to assess and adopt. But that's where we spell failure if we haven't even considered the design aspects, the standards associated with that, the assessment, the adoption, the integration, the sustainability, and end of life. So we're really having to take, like I said, a bit of a humbling approach to stepping back, assessing what the need is, and addressing that need. We all know in IoT it's relatively a mesh environment, something we have to build out. We can't just plop it in place. And so how do you construct that as a layered type of format beyond the hardware aspects of it? So as we think about IoT, I'd like us to think about what is the need we're doing and how do we build on it? How do we create that infrastructure to continue building it, to allow it to interconnect, to interact, and to transform data across these areas? And one last point of that is we often think in the United States around EHRs or EMRs, electronic healthcare records or medical records. Those are a Band-Aid approach. That's a billing system that's been used to transfer data. So in medical systems, we're not looking to use a Band-Aid approach. We're looking to create true standards and true transformation of data across all these disparate systems. So with that type of mindset, start thinking beyond what we can do as hardware or technologists and what actually are the patient's needs, payers, and so on. Good? On time?
Awesome.
Excellent. I don't know. I'm watching him for the timekeeping.
Oh, that was extraordinary. Thank you very much. There are some questions coming in,
No worries.
including, and if you could think about these until then, but in terms of where we are today in some of those areas, that would be really good to know, and then kind of what's the timeline look like over the next 5 or 10 years. Our next speaker is coming in from Brussels. It's Bruno Herrmann. He is a columnist at EContent. He's also a marketing genius. He's done some really extraordinary things, and he's Mr. Globalization. He's very much in tune with what's required, what's happening, and what's real about globalization. And Bruno, this is a great topic for you because you've got the technology side and you understand kind of the world. You'll be talking about IoT and global content effectiveness. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Doug. Thanks a lot. I hope everybody can see and hear me. Well, if you can move to the first slide, please. So what I'm going to talk about today is about content effectiveness. It's a huge topic. It's a huge topic for any digital initiative or any digital business. But I think IoT is really a nice case to really explain how and why globalization and localization plays out in this area, and actually how to actually also leverage those assets and those trends. I have a lot of experience in digital product content experience leadership. Most recently, I was leading digital globalization for the Nielsen company, which is probably a company you've heard of. And also, as Doug said, I'm a columnist and contributor and author in the area of digital globalization. So how to make the most of digital around the world and why it's so challenging. The world is not flat. So that's why I put this nice little map on my slide. Thank you for moving to the next slide. So yeah, the question might be from you, what do you mean with content effectiveness or global content effectiveness? I think it means different things to different people, but you know, after all these years, I've come to the conclusion that you could summarize it or you could present it as some sort of you know, three sides coin, reflecting actually what people, customers, users want in terms of linguistic, cultural, and functional requirements. And that's very important because when you develop, first of all, when you design, and then when you develop, when you launch a product, you might think that, yes, it has to be international, so let's translate it, or let's just try to, you know, find a partner locally who can, you know, can do something with it. Well, in my case, I would like to structure it between the linguistic effectiveness, the cultural effectiveness, and the functional effectiveness. Linguistic is quite easy. We all have a language that we speak, or multiple languages that we speak. We also have, all of us in this session, we all have our cultural values, which are influenced by legal, religious, political, you know, circumstances. So essentially, the cultural effectiveness is quite important, more than ever, I would say, in the digital world, because the digital world is borderless by nature, but you have to actually embrace diversity, the cultural diversity, and also the cultural effectiveness. The functional effectiveness is really where I would say in this picture, IoT is really, really interesting and challenging at the same time, because the world is not flat, as I said, but most importantly, I would say that when you travel around the world, you realize that each country, each market, and sometimes within each market, there are a number of ecosystems. There are a number of environments that you have to deal with if you want to reach out and engage with customers. And that's what IoT has to take, has to consider as well. People developing IoT products have to consider, because it's really challenging. Well, the best example I could give is not really an IoT example. When you travel around the world, you can try to plug your laptop to, in your hotel room in France or in Switzerland, you will have different plugs. Well, it's probably a very trivial example, maybe silly, but it shows, that standardization is really not really at stake here. It's really embracing this functional diversity and these functional requirements. So that's how I would introduce this huge topic of global content effectiveness. But now moving to what's really hot for IoT, thanks for moving. I wanted to just touch on 5 major trends. So don't run away, there are not too much information. Just to keep it simple, but also to keep it actionable for you. And I wanted to articulate those trends and those opportunities around innovation and transformation. Because for me, IoT, globally speaking, is really an innovation driver and also a transformational driver. So the first really quick point I would like to make here is that IoT is one of the best examples where people, leaders, designers, developers, architects have to embrace end-to-end content. Of course, we think about text, we think about voice, we think about metrics. I just took those examples because, you know, in many cases, IoT content is really based on these 3 pillars, if I can put it that way. An interesting example is voice, obviously, because text and metrics, okay, we all know what it is, but voice, when you think about it, it's extremely challenging to deal with that, not only because of, you know, the accents that people may have in with only one language, but also the tone, all the things that are actually conveyed in the voice. And you have to actually capture that, you have to leverage that, and you have to translate that into data. So end-to-end content is not just text, it's not just the metrics, the data, the pure data you can get, but also all the interaction that people have with IoT products, you know, from a display perspective, but also from an input perspective. So definitely something to think about here. The second point I would like to make is that IoT leaders should really think about enabling big data, but also enrich smart data. IoT is a synonym for many people of a lot of data, and it's true. But now the trend is definitely to move from big data to smart data. How to leverage data for the business in the most actionable way and at scale around the world. So IoT has a role to play in that, and is playing a role, by the way, by actually, you know, transforming these huge amounts of content, these huge amounts of data into some smaller, more actionable, more segmented smart data. So quite interesting to follow that trend as well. Then I would like to mention that you know, IoT products should really follow the rule of making applications and products truly world ready. As I said before, digital is really, you know, global, borderless by nature. But if you don't really keep that in mind from the beginning, specifically people designing and developing IoT products, they will really probably be slower, or they will actually come across a number of issues that are coming up in some markets. Think about China, for instance, as an as an international market, where, you know, you have to, you know, you have a challenge in terms of, as I said before, in terms of languages, of course, but also in terms of political requirements, cultural expectations, and so on and so forth. So definitely, you know, this world readiness approach is critical for IoT products. Think about your product already, you know, in sight for international customers, that you don't have to apply. You don't have to change things. You don't have to go through a number of iterations. So definitely, there is a way to make products more flexible, more agile, to accommodate all these diverse requirements. Then, actually, IoT is also accelerating content supply and experience value chains. It's obvious, probably, because you know that IoT content goes very quickly. It goes in and it goes out, obviously. But I would also make the point here just to say that when you think about the content supply chain, whether it's from a pure product management perspective or from a customer experience perspective, really IoT is probably one of the best tools or one of the best enablers to do that. And finally, matching customer journeys with snackable content. That's something which is very close to the heart of marketeers. Snackable content is today the best way to really stick to what customers want before they are customers. So IoT applications are a great tool a great way to enable that, to actually, develop and use content in a more fragmented way so that it goes really close to what people, customers, users are doing. And these were the points I wanted to make. Thank you.
Outstanding. Thank you, Bruno. This is back with Doug here in Scottsdale. We have a variety of questions coming in, and I believe there are some meetings around the world where you're collecting your questions and sending them in, so continue to do that. That's awesome. Our next speaker is Olivier Bernard. He's, I believe, based in the Silicon Valley. You're Director of Strategy at IP Product Group. You'll be talking about the cellular networks as an enabler for IoT. Good morning, Olivier.
Good morning, Doug, and thank you very much for the opportunity to talk to you guys. So next slide, please. I'm Director of IPG Strategy for ARM. Many people don't know ARM. Next slide, please. But ARM is probably one of the most pervasive unknown companies in the world. What we do is CPU architectures, and through a network of partners, we have a wide array of CPU options that goes in pretty much anything IoT. So if you have any kind of device that needs computing power, mostly battery operated, then most likely that product is based on our product. And we have two organizations. We have one which does the IP CPU stuff, but we also have a platform that allows you to manage IoT data from generation to transport to organization and then eventually to consumption. So we have a very horizontal approach to IoT where we touch just about every single market out there. Next, please. So many of the IoT cases now requires a wide area network, and that's because you have a wide area to cover. You have pervasive need for connectivities, and even though the vast majority of IoT devices has been deployed using Wi-Fi, Zigbee, Bluetooth, or other short-range protocol, which is great for indoor application, when you need to go outside, when you need to go into smart cities, when you need to go into agricultures, you need something a little more. And so that's where the emergence of low power, wide area networks such as Sigfox and LoRa and Ingenu comes in play. Next slide, please. So these were early development of technologies that was available, and that's because cellular at the time was really focused on consumer products, on cell phone, on tablet, and so forth, and that's really where the money was for those guys. But as the MNOs are looking to expand their revenue stream, they have been looking very, very, very closely to the emergence of IoT, previously known as M2M. And what cellular offers that the previous technologies doesn't offer is range, mobility, and security. And so it provides a global coverage throughout the world, leveraging consumer infrastructure already in place. It's scalable to billions of devices by the nature of the business. It's secure, much more secure than Wi-Fi. And at this point, the hardware has really come down in cost. So next, please. So I would say that today, the cellular connectivity is at an inflection point. And the reason for that is because the technology is mature. The MNOs are paying attention to IoTs and deploying a lot of services, especially for IoT. So LT Cat-M for one, and NB-IoT coming up. IoT is now very much part of the upcoming 5G standards with massive IoT deployment. And then one of the last trends that's interesting is to reduce the cost of the hardware and to make it easy to manage through the life cycle of the product. A new concept of eSIM has come together. So if you combine the willingness of the operators to service IoT with the technology that's available, then you have a perfect storm for moving a lot of devices to cellular type of connectivity. Next slide, please. So speaking about SIM evolution, I think most everybody knows what a SIM card is and how you put this in your phone and you enable your phone and suddenly you're connected to your network. The different SIM cards have been in evolution for about 20 years now. And we has just now reached a point where we got what we call an eSIM, which is an electronic chip that you can put on a board that has a CPU inside and a software stack that you can change the profile and so forth. So if you take that SIM card, next slide please, and you compare a little bit the life cycle of IoTs, it used to be that when you deploy a product, you take your product, you add a SIM card after you've chosen your operators, and then you send the device in the field and you pray that you don't have to change the operators, you don't have to change anything. Because the only way to change your operator or to update the device is to go in the field and physically replace the SIM card. With the eSIM, you have a way to really integrate the SIM card into your product from the get-go and then send it to the field. And once it's in the field, you can provision it, you can have secure identity, you can have all kinds of services around it that allows you to manage the device actively while in the field. And that's something that is really hard to do for other technologies, especially Wi-Fi, and to do it in a very secure way. Next, please. So if you look at the role of iSIM and being able to change on the fly the operators that you're dealing with for devices already in the field, you really have the ability to scale IoT to new levels using cellular coverage. That's about it for me. Any questions?
I'm sure we will have some questions, Olivier, 2 of them already. So thank you very much. Great conversation, great topic. Our last speaker is Carla. Last but not least, Carla Leslie. She's a business development at Cargo Partner. I believe you're in Salt Lake City, Carla.
Yes.
Fantastic. And you're going to be talking about IoT implementation in logistics, which is a topic near and dear to you and many of our members.
Yes, of course. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Cesar, please. So from this slide, you can see that basically Cargo Partner alone, we have 100 offices in over 25 countries. We also have a large agent base in countries where we don't have a wholly owned office. We have to communicate with the carriers through EDI feeds. We have to communicate with the airlines. We communicate with customs brokerage here in the United States as well in all the other countries as well. When we're moving shipments in and out of the countries, we have to, clear them through their different platforms. So this requires a lot of communication. On a very large scale, the Internet of Things can help a great deal with logistics. For example, Cargo Partner provides shipping, warehousing, distribution, and supply chain management all over the world, and this requires a large amount of communication back and forth. Cargo Partner also understands that there's some potential uses of IoT technology that includes vehicle monitoring as we, progress in time, and then the maintenance of those, real-time tracking of the shipments, environmental sensors and shipping containers, because we're looking at different commodities, that are spending a significant amount of time in the container, and we want to make sure that the temperature doesn't fluctuate or too much humidity, and then it ruins the commodity. And we also like to work on gathering information on our employees and then the different tools that we offer our employees as well as all of our customers out there. While it might take a while for all these kinds of technologies to emerge, the efficiency of logistics and shipping could be significantly increased if they all work as expected. Just within my time, you can go to the next slide as well. I've seen a huge transition from when I started in the industry to now 9 years later, just on how things continue to develop. So our own personal visibility and collaboration platform within Cargo Partner is we like to offer, data to our customers as well as anything that will help them manage their supply chain, more efficiently. So our supply chain visibility and collaboration platform is streamlining the flow of communications from where you could see on this slide. And then it's also the information and goods along the supply chain from all the way from procurement, production, transport, warehouse management, and distribution. Our platform is able to bring all the involved parties together, and then it gives them more optimized, they can optimize their processes, and we can all communicate with each other within this one platform. You can move to the next slide. So on this one, you can see like when we're working with different, suppliers and customers all over the world, there's a lot of communication going back and forth. So we've made it to where the actual supplier can go in and create their own purchase order, and then it would kick out to the different offices, whether it be at origin or destination, and we are all getting visibility to the shipments that can come up. That way we make sure that we're managing them and we're getting them to the end consumer in a timely manner. We are also able to see if there's any discrepancies ahead of time, which allows us to escalate that and make any necessary changes that we need to make prior. You can go to the next slide now. So communication and documentation is huge in regards to logistics and the Internet of Things. And so linking the systems via EDI, which is the electronic data interchange, it allows us to guarantee and document consistent service quality. Our dedicated integration competence center also provides easy compatibility and quick integration of wide variety of data formats and protocols that are necessary when communicating via EDI with, the large vessels and the airlines and, customs brokerage. Next slide. So our reporting and analytics, it makes all the processes and the communication you can easily track it, as well as we hold all the documentation in here for our customers. They can run their own reports, they can change their trends, they can look at what they've done this year and then basically get an idea of how they need to change things within their supply chain for the following year. And then next slide. Okay, there it is. So by analyzing your supply chain, we can monitor the utilization of transport routes and freight capacities to find the most efficient solutions for our customers' current and future requirements. And then in addition to the continuous development of our standard applications, we offer detailed processes, analysis, and requirements in regards to engineering. And then based off the different specifics of our customers' needs, we can develop and then implement dedicated applications for their optimization of their supply chain. And we're able to go in and customize any of these reports and set up different filters to where they're getting the necessary information that they need in order to make their processes more efficient. And then I think that's basically, yep, that was it.
Okay, great. Thank you, Carla. We are got 22 minutes for questions, and we have a lot of questions. So if you still have one, please ask it, and we'll do our best. If we spill over, there is a blog post that will come out on this, and we have the opportunity to answer your questions separately. And also, if you're a member, we're happy to connect you up to the speakers as well. So Carla, while we have you, you've been involved with logistics with the Cargo Partners for 9 years. You've seen this transformation. Where do you see it going? In 9 years from now, 10 years from now, what will shippers be dealing with in those days? What problems that they're having today will be solved in 10 years?
Well, I think a lot in my time alone, we've gone from, when we had major hit on the economy, we're moving more towards like lean manufacturing. And so it's very imperative that we have all these tools in place and we're able to communicate, because that way our customers, they can plan better and they don't have to bring in all the product and, have to be sitting on that amount of inventory. And just in my time alone, like customs brokerage For example, we've gone totally digital. Before, you'd have to have like an actual paper document. We've integrated all the different government entities with customs brokerage, USDA, you know, Fish and Wildlife. We're all within the same platform now, and that's within the last 4 or 5 years alone. Drivers, when they're delivering shipments, they're able to upload like the proof of deliveries off their phones now, and then that kicks into our system and it goes out to the customer. It's all like live, you know, it's in a sense live feeds, you know, maybe a few minutes difference and stuff, but it makes a huge difference when people are trying to manage their supply chains, and there's so many different parties involved and different time zones and countries. So it'll just continue to grow and develop.
That sounds good. So I'd like to open up that question and a little bit broader question to everybody on the panel, and kind of going back to maybe some of the things that Olivier mentioned or Bruno mentioned, you know, especially the plugging into different countries, right? So 10 years from now, will we be able to get off the plane in Paris or in Myanmar or in Tokyo and be able to plug right in to those systems, or are we talking about something that's further out than that? Where do you guys see this, ladies and gentlemen, see this over the next 10 years? And will we get to the stage that Olivier and Bruno, you talked about, where you'll just be able to plug in through SIM cards and other technology?
Well, my point would be that I got exactly the same question 15 years ago when I was in the high-tech industry. And at that time I said, I don't think there will be that level of standardization. And today I'm right. So I guess to your question today, I would say in 10 years from now, I don't think it will happen. Unless there is such momentum to standardize to a degree that we've never seen before. With globalization, I mean, it depends on the direction that globalization is going to take in the next years. Because right now, globalization is a little bit questioned by a number of people in different regions, in North America, in Europe. So I think, of course, that's purely political. But at the same time, this has an influence on, you know, marketeers and people actually making decisions about products, etc. If this type of globalization is really, I wouldn't say changed, but recalibrated, then, you know, who knows? But 10 years seems a little bit challenging. I wouldn't bet my salary on it, to be honest. That's my take, because I got exactly the same question when I was working at Hewlett-Packard 15 years ago. So I guess it's, for me, it's, Doug, please wait a little bit longer.
Okay. Olivier, you're right in the heart of it there in Silicon Valley.
Yes.
So
I would probably choose to disagree with Bruno on that topic. I think there's definitely a trend for globalization, for standardization. If you look at what was happening before in cellular technology around 2G and 3G and CDMA, everybody was doing their own soup, and it was uncompatible, and that created a lot of problems and roaming. But if you can look at it as at the beginning of the cellular era, where you were roaming between California and Texas, that went away. And I think the same trend will go, that roaming from the United States to South America, to Europe, that's already mostly gone away. And to a large extent, people realize that to take real advantage of the digitization and the IoT, you need to have standards that work everywhere. So there is a lot of big players, especially the cloud guys, that aggregate a lot of those data and host a lot of the application, that are working very hard to make sure that everything is compatible and working with each other. And I think we're getting there. I think cellular is really going to help that, because there's a lot of companies that have a very horizontal approach and understood that fragmentization is the enemy and standardization is the solution.
Okay, so cellular and the cloud are accelerating that change, it sounds like. What do you think, William?
So I agree with both Olivier and Bruno. I agree in some points with both of you, but to reflect on, look at this example, our own meeting here, IoT. The standard isn't just Internet of Things, it's industry of things. And we haven't even defined that, what is Internet of Things? So though I believe that we will need the standard, I look at RF and we think, oh, what is it, 1356 or 955 or 433? We haven't even standardized on that or driving on which side of the road. So when I look at these type of things, we're not going to be 100% there. But we have to be there as far as in connectivity, standardization, and interconnectivity. And we're talking at a digital level, not in a paper, traveler, or Band-Aid scenario. So I think it needs to be there. It's not going to be there 100%, but we have to compare where we're coming from, and we really haven't even defined those boundaries yet.
Gotcha. What are some of the opportunities, the business opportunities that are going to happen between now and then that people should be thinking about for their own, either application for their own business or actually getting involved with for their own business?
It's the global economy. I think it's exactly what Bruno and Olivier and Christian and Carl have all been talking about. If we look at supply chain, or we'll say lean manufacturing as an example, and the things that Carl is alluding to, if we look at the aspects of health that I've spoken for the business side, it's going to drive this, but it's not until we, as those messengers, whether it's an IEEE or whatever method to establish the standards, until we get together on that and keep saying the same message, that, addressing the need to define exactly what we're trying to do. What is going to be the impetus? Is it cellular? Might be, because everyone uses cellular. Is it going to be healthcare? Is it going to be just the global economy generally?
So to build on that, I'd just like to interrupt for a second, and so please feel free to answer that question in a moment. But Jan has a question, and it relates to health. So I wanted to get back to you while you were talking about it, William. Within health and medical IoT, are you able to discuss, number one, which segments of health med are growing the fastest in IoT, and two, which segments are being funded?
Very good question.
Those may be aligned.
So the questions are going to what is really driving in the healthcare area. Obviously driving down healthcare cost, readmittance, quality of care, pretty much all these type of things are pretty obvious. But in our business, diabetes, cardiac specifically, are driving our initiatives. I use India as an example at 85% estimated diabetes, relative to 76% cardiac. These things, especially in what we characterize as emerging market or BRIC countries, are really going to drive that. From our perspective, it's moving outside the solution of just addressing one disease state, but creating a causal relationship. You're diabetes, and does your phone tell you that the air quality UV index particulate count is going to impact you? If you're cardiac, does it tell the pressurization of your airplane is going to thicken your blood? So the causal relationship, even to your dentist telling you have a precursor to diabetes or cardiac. So there's a lot of interconnection relative to just single point sensing of how to interconnect what Carla's doing in communications with her suppliers and product, and the same things that Olivier is talking about from cellular.
Very good. We have and feel free to jump in if you've got something to add. We have a question that relates to something, Christian, you talked about, and you've actually already partially answered this, but I thought it would be worthwhile to at least digest it more broadly. The question is from Emiliano, and he's asking, in your opinion, what is the main challenge regarding IoT and the tons of data that are living in the cloud nowadays? You've answered that, but if you could articulate maybe a little bit further on that topic.
Yes, well, as I mentioned, I said that for me the main issue there is that you have a lot of data, but the objective of that is to gain value of the data. So I think that you have to work with data scientists at a lot of tools, like, for example, tools for machine learning, deep learning, to try to get value from the data. A typical case of that is when you, for example, have to analyze an image and detect if you have a type of cancer. So with machine learning and image classification, you can do that, and you can let the physicians put the effort in other things rather than detect a cancer, yes? But for me, the most important thing here is what to do, and in what to do, you need the help of a data scientist and a specialist in mathematics and in other fields of mathematics.
Okay, very good. You also, Christian, you mentioned narrow band versus wide area network. Could you There's a question on that, like what are we really talking about there, and what is the timeline for that?
Well, what we are seeing that, for example, we have a roadmap with our products. We nowadays are working with gateways, and with this gateway we send the data to the cloud. But we think that in coming years, let's say 2 or 3 years, the narrowband band would be implemented very, very well. And in that case, you will replace, for instance, the gateway and have all sensors connected directly to the cloud. Of course, you have to take care about the amount of data that you send to the cloud, no? Because you will find that some sensors gather telemetries, maybe 300 telemetries each second, so it wouldn't be viable to send all this data to the cloud, of course.
Sounds good. One of the questions, I believe this came up during either William or Bruno's conversation about blockchain. So the Internet of Things and blockchain, how do these two technologies or initiatives align, and where are we going to see the biggest bang for the buck over the next 5 to 10 years? Will it be in logistics? Will it be in healthcare? Where are we going to see it, do you think?
I know from a healthcare standpoint, and this is something that we've actually received patents on relative to data schemas, and I compare to the same conversations I've had with Google, Yahoo, and other organizations that are dealing with large amounts of data. The movement from, we'll say, peer-to-peer encryption versus data encryption, data protecting itself, basically, to kind of put it in simple terms, is driving this. And an example, if we use it in deep brain stimulation and transfer patient data to the cloud analysis and returning that data to the patients, we now realize that it can't be we use the example of a missile, a fly-by-wire missile. It can't be fired and not recalled. And so that kind of goes into what we characterize now as metadata encapsulated token authentication. So that gives you a bi-directional capability to tokenize the data. Literally, if you think of the foundation of blockchain, everybody thinks of Bitcoin. But if you think about almost the reconstitution of fragmented data, the ability for data to interconnect and track its own, or to even define whether it now should be authenticated and then resend. So a lot of that's coming from the healthcare side for sure, because of the protection, HIPAA and so on, but also you're getting a lot of drive from the military sectors.
What are some of the things that are driving the development of those? Is it only certain countries, or are you seeing it primarily?
We're seeing it everywhere.
So you're seeing it everywhere.
We're seeing it everywhere. We're seeing a very high drive. We know Medtronic's largest in the world for medical devices, so we have our fingers on the pulse. But if I look at dealing with Microsoft, or things I was doing yesterday with Samsung, and some of the equipment that we're interacting with, is though it's focused for our needs in healthcare, I still look at it from the manufacturing of medical devices to the interaction of individuals. And I'm seeing it driven from Russia, from China, from India, from South America, even Africa, if you think about the outer net and some of the CubeSat scenarios that are going on. So there's a lot of initiatives out there that are helping drive this.
Okay, very good. Bruno, Olivier, Carla, any thoughts on the alignment between what we're talking about and blockchain?
That's a topic I'm investigating right now, and I have a good friend of mine who is working in the finance industry, banking, insurance, and so on. And he told me that blockchain-driven technologies were extremely intriguing for all these big banks and financial institutions, specifically to, I wouldn't say regulate, because that's a big word, but also to manage or to lead in terms of transactions of data. So I think I'm investigating it right now, so I cannot give you a detailed answer to that, but it seems to be very hot in the finance industry. That's what I hear, because I was in Switzerland last week, and of course in Switzerland, guess what? You have banks. And I was talking to a good friend of mine, and he was telling me the latest and the hottest in terms of technologies around, in this company, but also in the finance industry, and I trust Switzerland for this, for this type of information. And he told me that it had to do a lot with data transaction and also control and regulation to use blockchain-driven technology. But I'm investigating right now, so probably I will write an article about that in a few.
Okay.
I think in general, if you're looking about IoT, One of the issues you may have is security and point of attack and, surface of attack and so forth. So when you look at IoT, there is two aspects. There is the data provenance, making sure that the data that's generated is the one that was actually generated and didn't get tampered for. And that's what blockchain uses as a huge influence. But there is also authentication of devices, meaning that you know that the device that is generating the data provenance, is the device that was supposed to generate those data. So as you scale billions of devices, it becomes more and more important to know that you got the right data from the right devices at the right time. And so blockchain has a role to do with this, but it's very CPU intensive, it's very power intensive, so it's not going to be for all applications. But when the data provenance is very important, just like in medical applications, then it's not an option. And that's the role we see for blockchain.
Understand. That's good. And then for many of the people on the line and also our members, they tend to be very globally minded, and kind of going back to what Bruno talked about in terms of where are we with globalization. Technology seems to overcome politics in many cases, right? Sometimes politics wins, sometimes the reality of technology wins, but I'm thinking that maybe overall technology will win. Am I being too optimistic?
No, I think you're actually spot on, Doug. And one thing I challenge my colleagues here is look into what I described as the outer net. Look at the possibilities, and I won't go into the details of it right now, but when you start to see that, it addresses exactly what Doug's saying. And it really even goes to the point of simply education, of educating the people around us, removing some of the barriers or demystifying. Look into the outer net. I think you'll be intrigued.
Yeah, Carla, these are things that, this condenses supply chains. It allows the supply chain to work in different locations along the way. And it facilitates some of the things that you talked about. We're seeing technology change rapidly in logistics as well.
Oh yeah, it's vital for the technology to continue to change. That's why we have a whole team that sits in Austria, and that's what they do, is they're just continually, making sure that we keep advancing ourselves to keep up with everything, because it's important, everybody needs that. And the more information we can offer and, the more communication we can have from all the different parties involved with all these transactions, because we're moving all over the world, it's huge. So whatever we can offer our customers, and we take all the feedback too. So if they're willing, if they want to see something else, we're trying to implement that stuff as well. And it's important. I can't imagine being in this industry 25 years ago, how they did it, it's huge. And everybody's doing it. Like just here locally, like all of our government entities realize that it's important for all of their data to be integrated. So.
We only have a couple more minutes, so we only have time for one more question. And so any of you, please jump in or point up something that we haven't talked about before that you want to make. The conversion of kind of the macro conversion from big data to smart data. I think it was either Bruno or Olivier, you talked about that. What are some of the mega milestones related to that transition from big data to smart data?
I think the short answer is AI and machine learning. One of the big transitions you're going to see is as number of devices and sensors increases to billions and billions, the amount of data is not going to be manageable, whether it's from a storage standpoint or from a transport standpoint. So you're going to see a distribution of the consumption of data from the edge with mobile edge computing and then all the way to the cloud. So you're going to see at every single level of the transport of the data, some level of intelligence, some level of insight and learning, and not everything is going to be sent over to the cloud.
No, I'll support exactly what Olivier is saying relative to blockchain and even some of the other aspects that we've been talking about is specifically in artificial intelligence. We think of quantum computing, quantum entanglement, all these aspects, but a lot of the failures are to look at it from the perspective of Waymo image, and it's predictive versus learning. So what Olivier said around learning systems is a critical point as we move from what's been characterized as big data to predictive to now learning type systems. So.
Yeah, I can make one. Sorry, can you hear me? No.
Yes, we can.
Yes, you can.
Oh, okay. Sorry. No, what I wanted to say is just that I fully agree with what Olivier just said. AI is going to drive a lot of change to move to smart data, but there is something else that AI will do is actually to help businesses, to help companies to handle their data more directly and probably more effectively. Because, you know, over the past years, what I've seen personally is that many companies, small, big ones, have actually, you know, used or connected with external partners because they were afraid or they couldn't really handle these amounts of data because it was too big for them. And now AI is actually helping them really narrow this down and actually make the most of their data without having to go through a cycle, going to, okay, external supplier, back to me, etc. So I think AI is going to accelerate smart data in addition to make it possible.
Sounds good. I want to thank all of the speakers today. We've come to the end of our hour. This is a topic that we could speak about for hours, but we don't have the time today. But if you have additional questions, please send them to info@globalchamber.org. Thank you all speakers for what you've delivered today and what you've shared. We really appreciate it. As we have questions over the next couple days, we'll include that in our blog. Our next conversation is somewhat related in some areas. Next week we'll be talking about agriculture and what's happening in our agriculture and what are some of the technologies that are changing the game on that side of things. We have weekly Globinars because, number one, we want to continually educate our members about what's happening to open up new opportunities, but also connect them to those opportunities very specifically, either the people or the industries or the specific opportunities. So thank you for being part of Global Chamber, and thank you all for today.
Thanks, everyone.